Hello, everyone. Welcome to Promethean Actions Live Question and Answer Show. My name is Adam Sturman. I'm a producer here with Promethean Action and Promethean Pack. Today, I am joined by the lovely Susan Kokinda and Barbara Boyd of Promethean Action and Promethean Pack. So let me jump right into it. Today's story is going to start with about something that happened 2 days ago, when the ceasefire that's currently still happening in Iran was extended at the behest of Pakistan. And 2 days ago, Trump said this is going to be extended until the discussions conclude, which I believe he's putting on the role of Pakistan, until Pakistan decides that discussions are concluded, or they actually have some kind of workable proposal. This morning, Trump is upping the pressure, and this was posted literally within the last 2 hours, both of these here. Iran is having a very hard time figuring out who their leader is. They just don't know. The infighting is between the hardliners, who have been losing badly on the battlefield, and the moderates, who are not very well moderate at all, but gaining respect. We have total control over the Strait of Hormuz. No ship can enter or leave without the approval of the United States. It is sealed up tight until such time as Iran is able to make a deal. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And a little bit before that, he posted that this is a serious naval blockade still. I have ordered the United States Navy to shoot and kill any boat, small boats, though that may be. The naval ships, all 159 of them, are at the bottom of the sea. Okay, so basically, the second one, any boats that are putting mines in the water of Straits of Hormuz are going to be destroyed. There is to be no hesitation. Additionally, our minesweepers are clearing the strait right now. I am hereby ordering that activity to continue at a tripled up level. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So that's what just happened this morning. That's the latest on the Iran situation. We have an update on the SPLC drama that broke over the past few days. Barbara's going to be talking about that. But I just wanted to say that there is one more thing, which is the Virginia election. The referendum that just happened in Virginia, that referendum was only won by less than 3%. Less than 100,000 votes in Virginia. 3%. This is now on a fast track to be heard by the Virginia Supreme Court. There was a Virginia court that basically is preventing the vote from being certified fully. President Trump had something to say on this, which I should bring up, because he's saying that there was, again, more funniness in the vote here. Excuse my scrolling here. Here we go. A rigged election took place last night in the great Commonwealth of Virginia. All day long, Republicans were winning. And it was true. I remember my friend was telling me, hey, we're up. The spirit was unbelievable until the very end, when, of course, there was a massive mail-in ballot drop, where I have heard that before, and the Democrats eked out another crooked victory. 6-5 goes 10-1. And yet the presidential election in November was very close to a 50-50 split. In addition to everything else, the language on the referendum was purposefully unintelligible and deceptive. Yes. I think by this Virginia Commonwealth law, if you're going to make a change to the Virginia Constitution, there has to be very specific wording in the referendum. Also, I think there has to be a certain amount of like a cool period, like some kind of before they can make. I know there's details, so there is a lot of challenges that are going to be heard by the Virginia Supreme Court. I think beginning as early as next Monday. So at least the state of Virginia is not going to be dragging their feet on this. I'd like to open it up to Barbara and Susan.
Well, I think we should start maybe with Virginia, since it's very critical that we actually focus a bit on the midterms amidst all of this vast change. And, you know, what actually happened here is massive deception, not only in the ballot measure, but in Abigail Spanberger, the current governor, who said she was not going to do redistricting when she was running for election. She was going to basically govern as a centrist Democrat. And instead, she came in and immediately implemented the entire progressive socialist Democratic Party agenda. Gun owners in Virginia right now are going to have new gun laws. We're back in the Green New Deal. We're into all of this nonsense. And it's not accidental. She's a former CIA operative, analyst, etc., who obviously practices her learning well in terms of deception. And essentially, a lot of people in Virginia are really, really, really upset. I don't know what the Supreme Court of Virginia is going to do. You know, a lot of people are very hopeful in that. I've had some experience with them, and I don't even know the present composition of the court. It used to be rock hard conservative. I don't think it's probably that way now, given the entirety of Ralph Northam's administration. But there's a fight on, and the fight is very much in terms of the midterms. A lot of people are very cynical. They shouldn't be. The administration is cleaning things up. There's a huge reorganization going on under Susan Wiles, preparing for the midterms, cleaning out any controversies in the cabinet, going after people who are not on the Trump agenda. And that's all happening amidst, you know, this case in terms of Florida, which is going to result in criminal indictments very, very soon. We have this huge expose of the Southern Poverty Law Center, which I'll get into, which is extremely important. And, you know, across the world, what's actually happening economically, as Susan went into in her video yesterday, and she may wish to say more, is Trump is continuing to reset the entire world economy. What does it mean that we now control all the choke points in terms of world order, world oil and gas? What does it mean that we now control pricing to a certain extent with these executive orders, which came out under the Defense Production Act to create much, much more supply to alleviate the price pressures at the gas pump and see what we can do in terms of upping refining capacity? All of those things are saying we're taking the main, you know, edifice of the City of London back into control of the United States. And that's the primary pressure point where you're seeing all of this insanity now, where major institutions in the United States are coming out and rooting for Iran. That tells you who controls them. That tells you and gives you a very critical insight into who our enemies actually are. So that's how I'd basically open the discussion for today.
Yeah, and look, I would just add, I think it's really important as we think about the issue of the midterm elections to very consciously address the question of how people are thinking about the world. You know, you look at this situation in Virginia just as an example. Enough people drank the Kool-Aid in the Virginia elections. They believed the propaganda. They believed the war, that Spanberger was going to be a moderate and blah, blah. I mean, admittedly, the Republican candidate, you know, was not up to the task in that election. But nonetheless, it was really the number of people who lived in the narrative. And what's now happening in Virginia, as both Barbara and Adam described, is people are being faced with reality. And I think that the more that reality penetrates, now, you know, this is in a kind of negative sense because they voted for somebody and they got something else. And now they've had the ice cold water thrown in their face in terms of what they have to live with for the time being. But when you look at it more broadly, what is going to determine the midterm elections? It's going to be the question of economics. And we're going to talk about this more as our discussion continues. But that then brings up the question of what is reality in terms of economics? Is it the pain you're immediately feeling when you go try and buy a pound of hamburger? It's painful. We all know. I mean, I saw an article that, hamburger is now a luxury item in the United States. And, or is it the understand, or the other big one is the price of gas at the pump, right? So are people going to make their decisions from the standpoint of the immediate pain they may be feeling, which is real? Or are they going to make their decisions from the standpoint of, do I understand where this is coming from, how it happened, that nobody for 50 years has tried to reverse it, and now we have a president who is in full combat to reverse the policies and eliminate the structures that gave us these policies? It's going to be the number of people who are living in that latter world of causes of the actual fight, and then make their decisions from that standpoint, which is going to determine the outcome of the midterm elections. And that's what I think we're going to be trying to do throughout the course of this broadcast: separate out the propaganda, the psy-war, the narratives from the incredibly dynamic historical process which we're engaged in at this point. And frankly, that's the only way you can understand what Donald Trump is doing with the conflict with Iran. You follow the mainstream media or the former Trump MAGA influencers, it's bing, bang, this, that, up, down, winning, losing, because they're looking at this from the standpoint of some, frankly, nonsensical metric of what winning or losing means. Winning for Donald Trump is removing the City of London's key remaining economic choke point, namely a irrational Iranian regime, which they could manipulate to keep the strait constantly in conflict, what the president's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, called the terror premium. President Trump is taking that off the table and trying to carry out an incredible reset, as he used the term, and Barbara focused on a few weeks ago, a reset of the world away from imperial institutions and back to sovereign nation states. And some of that is kinetic, like it is in with the conflict with Iran. But the issue is not these individual battles. It's what is the intention. And again, I'll just stress, the more people understand it from that standpoint, the more, number one, they will make the right decision in the midterms. And number two, you'll be able to organize other people to make the right decision in the midterms.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you to everyone who's joining us right now on x.com and on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, please drop us a like on the way in. If you're on x.com, please give us a quick reshare. Thank you for joining us on X. You can follow all of us on x.com. I put in all of our handles there so you can follow us all. All right, so the questions in today's show come from two places. We take super chats, and I also have 40 questions here lined up from our email newsletter. If you've been watching us here on YouTube, we have an email newsletter. It's completely free. Don't worry about spending any money on it. Just get on our free newsletter. The link is in the description. I put the link to submit your questions several times throughout the week in the email newsletters. So that's where these questions are coming from. Let's start today with a super chat here on the issue of Iran, since we were just talking about it. So Hawks fan says, how did our Navy let those tankers get taken by those tiny Iranian boats? I'll just say one thing. Just saying they're tiny is a little bit, you're underselling it actually. These are very fast, purpose-built speedboats that are designed to do these very targeted kind of disruptions. It's very similar in concept to the way you have these tiny little drones operating on the battlefield that are just destroying all the previous ways of fighting wars. So to say it's just a tiny little drone or a tiny Iranian boat, I think is underselling a little bit of the seriousness of what Iran has in terms of how they can continue to disrupt the Strait of Hormuz. But Barbara or Susan, any thoughts on that?
Well, to make it in short order, it is what's called guerrilla warfare. or if you want to get more technical about it, hybrid warfare. And, it's typical of regimes which are essentially without military power. That's what they do. It's, it can be very effective. However, you got to watch out because, as I emphasized in my update this week, Iran has a very, very, very good propaganda apparatus. And it, basically, you had a senator fall for it, where he basically saw some of this stuff and said, awesome. And who he was replying to was actually a reporter whose name I left out of my update there, who's already named in disclosures about Iran's, influence operation in the United States. That happened, a couple years back. They called in everybody and they said, what we need to do is massively infiltrate think tanks in Washington and give legitimacy to a whole bunch of people who will get their articles and journalism cleared through the Iranian Foreign Ministry. That's going on right now. That's what you're seeing all over the internet. And so you have to be very, very careful in the fog of war, not to give a lot of credence to anything, in my view, that anybody says, except what's officially said by the United States. And that may seem a little bit strange in terms of, I'm saying, trust the government at this point, which not many of us are inclined to do. But it's the only way you're going to find out certain things about what's actually happening in the war.
Thank you, Barbara. And thank you, Hawks fan, for joining us again this week. And I just got another interesting super chat from a viewer in Turkey. Thank you very much for sending this in. I'm not even going to try to slaughter your name. Thank you for sending in the question. Turkey is the first country that won against the British imperial system. Our Ataturk did that like Lincoln did. Why do you have bad perspective about Turkey? I think we are on the same side. Barbara, Susan, any comments on this? Do you have any feelings?
Yeah, I'll comment on it. I mean, yes, Ataturk, was a nationalist to actually try and create, a sovereign national country. I don't know enough history to say that I know that it's the first country that won against the British Empire. I'm going to have to look that up. But I think in terms of the current Turkish situation, I do a lot of shows with the gang over at Rich Does Politics, and they're all pretty conversant in terms of the overall strategic situation. And every time we have a discussion about Turkey, everybody very honestly says, I am not going to try and come to a conclusion about this because it's extremely complicated. You obviously have a Muslim Brotherhood influence in there, which we trace back to the British, but you also have influences which reflect the actual national interests of Turkey. And in terms of how that plays out in terms of the internal politics, I'm not conversant enough either. What my friends over at Rich Does Politics often conclude is that what you see going on with Erdogan is somebody who's basically tacking with the winds in terms of how he can maneuver to get the best deal for himself and his country. So I don't think we have a bad perspective on Turkey. I think Erdogan is a very questionable figure, but there's a lot of questionable figures out there that Donald Trump is working with because that's the world that he lives in, and he's trying to create a different environment where in every country, it's the groupings that represent the true interests of that nation that can come to the fore. And what he's trying to do is to cut the legs off those forces who are simply acting as pawns for the empire. And, exactly how that plays itself out in Turkey at the present moment, like my friends, that I share a lot of discussions with, I think I would be very foolish to try and come to a conclusion.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you from Barbara. Did you have anything you wanted to say? You good? Okay. Thank you very much, my friend from Turkey, from sending in your question. Please make sure you subscribe to our channel. We do 3 political briefings a week, plus this live show on every Thursday. So thank you for joining us. I'll take this last one here from Chad. Thank you, Chad, for joining us again. I'm not exactly certain what this is, but maybe you ladies will know. Hey, guys, can you explain how the Mockingbird media works?
Yeah, I'll take that. I mean, what he's referring to is the old CIA operation, which was exposed during the Church Committee days, called Operation Mockingbird, in which the CIA actually had control over every major publication in the United States. And that, has sort of been replicated with the media today, although I don't think it's the CIA who is really in control of them. I think it's much more a kind of private, alliance, quite frankly, with MI6 and with the City of London. It's working a little bit differently than Mockingbird actually worked way back when. And this all goes back to a guy by the name of Walter Lippmann, who was, basically an early British agent in the United States, became kind of the foremost communicator about the media from the establishment. And what he said was the media has to be controlled because government basically is involved in manufacturing consent. In other words, people are too stupid to make decisions, and we have to make decisions for them by creating a total sphere in which they don't get anything but propaganda. And he's called the Dean of American Media, which gives you some idea of how thoroughly this idea is ingrained in our media today.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. And thank you, Chad, for sending in your question. I hope we gave you some background there. Thanks for tuning in. And let's do this other one from Paul Cahill from an Australia friend. Thank you, Paul, for joining us this week. The American system is based on partnering with other countries rather than taking resources. How can we be certain Trump or friends will actually do this? And this is a friend from Australia.
Yes, right. I think we have to look at what he's already done. I mean, the key choke, now obviously Donald Trump is going to negotiate deals for the benefit of the United States. And he expects other countries to negotiate deals for the benefit of themselves. So, if he's negotiating with a weak leader, well, too bad for that other country at this particular moment. But I think, aside from going and looking at the individual bilateral negotiations, look at what they're doing on the structural standpoint. The means by which resources are taken from countries is the free trade system and the control and the central banking system, which has dominated the world, especially since we surrendered in 1913 with the Federal Reserve. That's the entity which, quote, takes resources from countries. Remember what Franklin Roosevelt said at Casablanca to Churchill, where he said, Winston, we didn't fight that war to restore British 18th century methods. And when Churchill challenged him on what he meant by that, Roosevelt said, by taking more out of a country than we put in with investments. That is the British imperial system. And what this administration is on record saying, as Jameson Greer, the president's trade representative, said when he walked right into the belly of the beast at Davos and gave a speech on Alexander Hamilton and the American system, this administration is breaking the grip of that British free trade imperial system to create the conditions where countries can adopt the American system. We're doing it. We certainly hope other countries do it as well. But the answer to your question is not some analysis of a particular bilateral deal. The answer to your question is this systemic question. We can be sure because Donald Trump has taken dead aim at the British imperial system of both free trade and supranational control of resources, insurance, and money.
Thank you very much, Susan. And thank you, Paul, for joining us this week. Thanks for being here. Make sure you're subscribed. Next show is going to be on Saturday. Okay, I got some more super chats here, but I'm going to switch real quick first to questions from our email newsletter. So the first ones we're going to be taking are going to be on the Iranian population and economy. So this first one here is from Juliet. How are the Iranian citizens doing? Do they have food, water, streets, transportation? Thank you. And the second one is from Jeff. How are the Iranian people doing economically? I heard they were running out of water. So thank you, Juliet and Jeff. We got a bunch of questions this week from people really concerned about the citizens of Iran. So these two questions really kind of capture that vibe.
Well, I'll start on this. Look, I don't know what the particular situation on the ground is. It wasn't good before the conflict began. You had massive inflation, the collapse of the Iranian currency, all of this in the context of this kind of despotic, crazy regime. It certainly isn't improving under these circumstances. Some infrastructure which had military ties has been hit. Obviously, oil revenues are non-existent for the country right now. But I want to answer, and Barbara may have more to say on this, but I want to answer this in the context of maybe I'm jumping the queue here, but there were other questions about why are we bothering with these negotiations? Why don't we go in and just bomb the crap out of them right now and get it over with? Because of the two questions that Jeff and Julie just asked. What about the Iranian people? Donald Trump does not want to destroy their country. He wants them to have the opportunity, as Vice President Vance said, to be normal. This is a great country with a rich culture, with a tradition of highly educated intellectuals and professionals. I mean, even under this regime, they still turn out an awful lot of highly educated, technical, and professional people, most of whom try and get the hell out of there and go to another country. But I think Donald Trump has two missions, and he's trying to thread, the needle in terms of them. One is take the regime of the Ayatollahs and the IRGC off the board as a threat to the world. And number two, figure out how to do that so that the people and the nation of Iran can restore themselves economically and politically. So I certainly can't quantify the situation on the ground, but I'm really glad that Juliet and Jeff, you asked that question, because I think that is a primary consideration in terms of the decisions that the president has made. He's not vacillating. He's not waffling. He's trying to resolve this, and he will resolve it. And if it comes to the point where he has to pull the trigger, he's going to do it, and I think everybody knows that. But as long as there's a chance to do this diplomatically, as long as you can get the circumstances where the more moderate people are in control of the country and can come to an agreement that doesn't hurt the Iranian people, that is his preferred outcome.
My immediately thought it's going to be hard to really know any of this through the fog of war, and especially through such a country that has such tight control over its citizens and the media. It's really going to be, unless you're an intelligence agency or military, I think it's going to be hard to know exactly what the situation is on the streets of Iran, especially in the middle of a war. Barbara, any thoughts on this one before we move on?
No, I would just point out that I saw some of the questions in here. Why don't we just bomb the hell out of them? This is economic strangulation. That's what's going on. Scott Bessent was out with a message about 2 days ago, which said, within, probably 3 days of his message, the storage facilities for the oil at Karg Island were going to be full. At that point, if you know the technology around oil wells, those oil wells start to fail completely. So their ability to have, a producing economy which is giving dough or money to pay the IRGC or to pay any of the people in the current government is going to be rapidly vanishing because they're not going to have any income coming in. So I think we're going to reach a crux point at that point. And again, the people I see, including the president, are very, very optimistic that we're going to get a deal. We'll just have to see how it all plays out.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Barbara. Okay, next questions are going to be on some of the international implications of what's currently going on, especially in relationship with China. Okay, this first question here is from Jane. Early reports indicated that the Iranian boarded cargo vessel, the Tuska, was filled with Chinese military equipment. I heard it was a lot of dual-use materials. I have heard no further reports on this. Has this been confirmed? And if so, as this is contrary to President Trump's agreement with China, are there any further developments on this? Thank you, Jane. Second thing is, what is the extent and mechanism for the People's Republic of China to support the IRGC and the Iranian governing group? There is a railway from the Far East to Iran, not sure about the auspices of countries along the route or what the influence they have over what is passing through. I suspect not much. Two, what is the likely involvement of Russia? There are 2 more generating units underway, the Bashir nuclear power plant, and completing them would be a negotiating item in any settlement negotiations. Thank you, Jeff, for your question. And the third one here, from Shannon. China rips off Russia and gets their oil at bargain basement prices. But since they have been caught aiding Iran, Trump could slap a 50% tariff on China, hurting their income, siphon off the Strait of Malacca militarily, and slow their AI data center building and exports to Russia. With a weakened crown and populism making grounds in the EU, do you think there is a chance Russia could break from China to gain newer, better opportunities? Or is Putin going to wait out the Trump administration and keep walking the line? Thank you, Shannon, for your very well put together question there. Barbara and Susan, your thoughts, Iran's relationship to China, Russia, what's moving forward?
This is a lot of what you won't see. This is what's called the back channels to this entire negotiation. And Trump actually gave China credit for getting Iran to the negotiating table during the short-lived sort of enthusiasm that everything was going to immediately result in a peace negotiation. I believe sincerely what Trump is aiming for, given his actions starting in Alaska and his meeting with Putin and proceeding forward, that we're looking at a grand bargain ultimately between China, Russia, the United States, and India, the biggest economies in the world in terms of population at this point and economic potential, and the United States, which is really the combination which could destroy the British Empire and has been at the center of London's strategy, keeping all of these countries at each other's throat rather than coming together for centuries. And I think what's important to recognize is that both of these, Russia, for example, has offered and would take all of the nuclear material at this point, and actually, in kind of a grand bargain. It's unclear whether the U.S. will go for that or whether we have the capacity, given all the nutcases we have in the Senate, to actually do something like that. But the whole idea here and the whole idea of our new national defense and operating strategy is the future is in the Pacific, not in the Atlantic. The future, we're a Pacific-facing nation. And where you see real growth going on is in both the Middle East, before this war and before the Hamas attack back in 2023, and the growing Asian and Southeast Asian economies. We have to basically reshore from them, but you've got a huge potential for actual complete human development in those 4 countries. I go back to the House of Lords report in 2018 from the British themselves, saying that these are the countries we're targeting. That's who was targeting in UK foreign policy and, quote, a shifting world order. They basically designed to keep everybody at each other's throats. And, the Green New Deal or globalization was the methodology around it. All of those countries signed on to the idea, except for Russia, of the Green New Deal, essentially saying, we're going to have a climate catastrophe. We need to basically do all of this stuff with, resources and everything else. And the United States signed on to that originally. Trump promptly took us out of it. So there's a bigger strategic picture behind what you're seeing in this flashpoint, I'll call it, of Iran. And you've got to constantly watch all of those things together as they work. Now, when Trump came into office, most of these countries had gotten into this framework of saying the United States is lost. Therefore, we'll all go with the BRICS. All right. And all of them actually were involved in the BRICS. Not only that, we'll go for ending the regime of the dollar in the world, which, of course, had it been implemented, and Biden was perfectly sanguine to get it implemented, would have destroyed the United States. Trump basically came in and campaigned against that by saying to all of these countries, the United States can give you a better deal. Exercise your sovereignty. And together we can actually develop the world. And that's been the policy he's had behind all of this stuff. Let's work out cooperative agreements to develop the world for the future of humanity. And you see the screams coming from the other side because they're wedded to this idea of managed decline, that the United States should just sort of go out peacefully and say, well, we had our time. Now it's time for all these other nations to come forward and run the world. We're not going to do that. And Trump's not going to do that. And that's really a central issue in all foreign policy discussions.
I think the other thing that needs to be addressed is sort of the thread going through all 3 of these questions. And I encourage the questioners, if you haven't read the President's National Security Strategy and the President's and the Pentagon's National Defense Strategy, one was released in December, the other was released in January, you should do so. Because the presumption that China and Russia are perpetual enemies is nowhere to be found in those documents. You can certainly find it in all of the screechings of the think tanks. The British defense, the British released a new defense doctrine, I think around the same time that we did, maybe a little bit earlier. Russia is the enemy. Russia is the perpetual enemy. You look at the think tanks in the United States, Russia, China are the perpetual enemy. That is not the strategic policy of the United States. Now, does that mean that there aren't some nasty actors in China or Russia who don't have the best interests of the United States at stake? Yeah. But that's like saying that there aren't any nasty actors here in the United States who aren't out to get Russia and China. That does not define the present administration. I don't think it defines the Putin government. And I don't think it defines Xi Jinping. I'm not going to go so far as to say the Chinese government. I'm just going to leave it at Xi Jinping, because I'm going to key off of what this administration has said. And yes, we've seen the claims in terms of the Chinese material on that ship and so on. At this point, I'm taking my verifiable intelligence from official statements from this administration. And I'm also taking my governing hypotheses in terms of what our strategy is and how we should look at these other countries from this administration. Because I've seen nothing in, the year and almost a half that, well, not quite a year, the year and a third that Donald Trump has been in, that he's doing anything other than what he said he was going to do, which is to take down the globalist system and create a world of sovereign nations in which no one nation is your permanent enemy, where you may have a leader or a regime that is very problematic, as we are with Iran right now. But again, he doesn't see Iran as our permanent enemy. He's trying to liberate it. So I just encourage everybody on this call, if you haven't downloaded especially the national security strategy, which is, I can't remember, like 25 pages, very readable. Read it and just think about the underlying assumptions and hypotheses that are embedded in this. And you're going to see that it might challenge some of your underlying assumptions and hypotheses.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Susan. And thank you to our newsletter subscribers. If you don't know, we have a completely free email newsletter. You don't even worry about paying for it. The link is in the description, or you can just search for Promethean Action, find our website, and the link to join our email newsletter is right on the front. It's on every page of our website. So please consider getting our free email newsletter. Okay, let's continue on the question. I have this one from Al on Epic Fury and the Second Amendments. Here we go. Number 6. An interesting question from Al. Al says, the Second Amendment protects freedom for Americans. Is the Epic Fury campaign considering arming the Persian people to defend themselves from the tyrannical Islamic regime?
I'd say the answer to that is yes. Did they do it? I don't have the slightest idea. You're venturing into classified territory here in terms of things which we can know and not know. And it's something which, I'm very convinced that in the discussions which have occurred around this campaign, there has been an extremely thorough debate and discussion and deliberation within the administration covering every single potential option. I'm 100% certain of that. People get all hung up on J.D. Vance was opposed to this war. That may or may not be true. We don't know. He says he doesn't reveal his actual discussions with the president. The president in offhand remarks seem to indicate that. But all that shows me is there was a huge discussion and deliberation about this, and JD now is firmly on board. He's leading the peace negotiations if they happen. And, you got to actually take that into account and also think about the fact that all of this is behind a shield of a war with lives at stake on our side if certain things which are classified are actually revealed. And also, the president is the master of surprise. He doesn't leak. He only leaks deliberately. And, you're not going to find out a lot from that standpoint, because that's how he conducts himself totally, given everything that's been arrayed against him and against us over the years. So I can't really answer your question because I don't know.
I'd also just add, it's an extremely complicated question in terms of how to do this. There are pretty credible reports that the administration did give either weapons or money to the Kurds so that they could carry out, some kind of operation inside Iran, which would help the population. Then at a certain point, the president was asked about this, and he said, we don't need them. And then I saw reports that, they kept the weapons and the money for themselves. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But given the fact that the president pretty much told them to stand down, lends a certain kind of credibility to that report. But I bring it up because I just want people to think through just how complicated these kinds of questions are, especially in a region like the Mideast, and especially with a government like the previous or halfway previous government of Iran, in terms of how tight its surveillance was and how brutal it's been. So, yeah, I agree with Barbara. I think this administration has looked at everything and have chosen the steps that they think are going to bring about the ultimate result we need, which is defanging this regime, and taking these threats and these choke points off the board with as little harm as possible, both to the Iranian people and to the world economy. That's a bunch of very complicated decisions and considerations that have to be made to take all of those things into account.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you to everyone watching. If you're watching on YouTube, please drop us a like. Please subscribe if you're not yet subscribed. We do 3 pre-recorded political updates a week, plus this live show every Thursday. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I have plenty of super chats here. So let's get to some of our friends in the chat here. Steph, welcome, Steph. Thank you for sending in this question here. What do you think President Trump will do with Ketanji Brown Jackson? It's obvious she was a DEI hire. What do you think will happen with the Supreme Court and DEI hires? Barbara, I think you may have some thoughts on this one.
Well, I don't necessarily think she was a DEI hire. I think she is typical of what is coming out of American law schools at this point. She is a dyed-in-the-wool progressive, which itself actually defines a certain mental attitude. I thought her testimony that she couldn't define what a woman was is actually indicative of what's coming out of our law schools. All right. So I think the problem is that people are victimized by the educational system at this point, which across the board rewards people who, basically come into coherence with this horrible, horrible, horrible progressive ideology. And people advance on the basis of how much they can repeat these stupid, insane, destructive, nihilistic talking points, which have nothing to do with the cultural and intellectual level you need to raise the country up to at this point if we're going to fulfill the mission the president has actually laid out for us. So that's how I would answer your question. I think there's a potential that there will be some Supreme Court battles within Trump's term in terms of people retiring. There's lots of rumors about Alito at this point. I don't know if they're true or not. I hope he doesn't retire necessarily at this point, but you just never know at which point we're going to have another hullabaloo about what the Supreme Court actually is and what it should be doing. And, so far it's, to be blunt, the real revolt is in the lower federal courts. It's not necessarily on the Supreme Court. I wouldn't, you can disagree with John Roberts on a lot of things. I do. But at the same time, it's not like what you see in terms of the insurrection, an actual insurrection, which is taking place with, say, the Washington, D.C. District Court or the Alexandria, Virginia District Court, or all of these, or the California District Courts, or all of this lawfare, which is being conducted against the Constitution and against the President of the United States. And that's really where the problem lies. Right now, we have a Supreme Court majority who has been knocking down these judges over and over and over again. But the point is that it has significantly stalled the president's agenda, along with the very rotten, I'll be blunt about it, Senate, which we presently have. And that's something which has got to be addressed in the midterms, is the United States Senate. Obviously, if the Democrats win, we're in deep kimchi. If they take both the House and the Senate, we're in deep kimchi, because then impeachment can happen. as opposed to what happened the last time around. But, I can't remark enough about how Tom Tillis can sit there and block the new head of the Federal Reserve's appointment. He's also threatening to block any, Attorney General appointment by President Trump. And it appears to me that, Tom Cotton is playing a major role in trying to get rid of Tulsi Gabbard. So the Senate is really a nasty bunch of people at this point, and we've got to figure out how to approach that strategically during the midterms.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and thank you, Steph, for sending in your question. Please make sure you're subscribed to our channel here, and the link for our free newsletter is in the description. Okay, we have a bunch of very interesting questions today. Salt and light. Do you believe that Edward R. Murrow was a propagandist and Senator Joseph McCarthy was really a hero and a patriot as documented by the Verona cables?
Nope, don't believe so. Okay, I mean, look, yes and no. All right, I mean, yes, there were communists in the government. There's no question about that. There were communists in the government during the Roosevelt administration. And did they provide useful, actual service to the United States of America? You betcha, because we were involved in the Second World War with the Soviet Union. That leftover stuff was what Joseph McCarthy, basically, went to work on. The Venona cables are a British intelligence job, okay, which frankly, I don't know whether to trust or not. There was considerable debate, within my former organization about their validity. And I always came down on the side that how could they be valid when the McCarthy period, in terms of its censorship of people and its brutality towards the intellectual class in the United States, actually wiped out a whole bunch of people who could have actually contributed to our development, whatever their political stripe. So no, I don't believe Joseph McCarthy was a hero at all. I think he was, kind of a disgrace. A lot of people think the opposite, but, that's my view of how I actually look at it in terms of I'm just a fanatic about the First Amendment and free speech. And, I don't believe in this kind of social castration by mob, which went on around the McCarthy period.
Yeah, and I'll also put it in, its larger setting, because what did the McCarthy period do? It basically cemented Winston Churchill's new game plan. Remember, the game plan by Franklin Roosevelt after World War II, had he lived, was to end the empires, to end Britain's control over Britain, France, the Dutch, the Belgians' control over their colonies, and let these countries become independent. Had Roosevelt lived, that would have been the post-war agenda. And you would have had a world of flourishing sovereign nation states, as the president today is trying to bring about, 80 years ago, or at least we would have been on our way. Winston Churchill came to Fulton, New Jersey and said, no, the only enemy is communism. And of course, this was a nation, the Soviet Union, which had just sacrificed millions and millions of people to stop Hitler, and we probably would not have won World War II without that. So then the sociological propaganda side kicks in with these witch hunts and the Red Scares. And that's what they were. And I'm not going to back down on that either, in terms of how it was used against the American people. As Barbara said, yeah, were some of these people still in government? Had they provided information to the Soviet Union during World War II? And were there probably still some back channels going on? Hey, that's going on today with British assets inside our own government that have to be cleaned out. But to whip up this psychological frenzy within the population, where people were literally turning in their neighbors, and where people were afraid to, whisper what their opinion was, was actually the beginning of the kind of big brother regime that they then tried to do with social media decades and decades later. Fortunately, we stood up and said, no, we're not going to let you do this. But to my thinking, the McCarthy period was no different than Russia, 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 and the way that it was carried out against the president by the same people for the same reason.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Barbara. And thank you, Salt and Light, for your question. Please make sure you're subscribed. Our next show is going to be on Saturday. All right. Thank you, Dog Nose, for sending this in. I know we get a lot of questions like this. Why does Trump act so grotesquely with memes, etc.? I don't think he acts so, personally, I don't think he acts grotesquely. You have to realize just how much the left has done to try and destroy not only his own life, but the lives of his family. Barbara, Susan, your thoughts on this one?
He's very strategic in his memes. You got to recognize again, pull the veil off behind the curtain. Is he really talking to just you when he does a meme? Or is he really talking to a whole array of people who he's chosen to get in their heads? All right. And do it for a reason. And, he's a master at that. He's a master communicator. He ticks certain people off, but it's to get them to react, to show themselves out in the open. And, it's kind of, if you've ever lived in New York City, it's kind of typical of New York City, because people really do trash talk, all the time to each other for a purpose. All right. And that's kind of what he does, is all that trash talk always has some kind of purpose behind it. And if you follow it closely, you'll see it. Is he talking to you, or is he talking to a certain senator that he just got off the phone with? Is he talking to you, or is he talking to a certain world leader who he just got off the phone with? You got to realize that it is not necessarily directed at winning you over as an adherent of Donald Trump. It's all very, very strategic and directed. Does it go off sometimes where I can't figure out what the hell he's saying or why he's saying it, and then I'm grossed out? Absolutely. But, it's kind of the nature of the way he does things.
Yeah, look at the Easter posts, where he drops the F-bomb against the Iranian government. I mean, that set a whole lot of people's hair on fire. But I really appreciated Jeff Childers' analysis on his coffee and COVID post, because he made the point, exactly as Barbara is, that this was strategic. The Iranian regime was counting on Trump getting wobbly because of the midterms and having to deal with, his any domestic blowback for him being tough. And this was a message to the Iranian regime. No, I don't care what domestic blowback I get, because I am serious about my strategic intentions in terms of you. So I definitely bought into that analysis of what that post was all about. But like Barbara, I'm sitting there when I first see it and saying, oh my God. Yes, and the healer meme did come out after the Pope opened his mouth.
Yes. Thank you, Barbara and Susan. Thank you. Let me pull it up here. And a quick thank you again to Dog Nose. Thank you for joining us every week. Love seeing you here. And let me get this one more before we move back to our newsletter questions here. P. Favada says, do you believe Trump intends to test the uranium to tie it to the Uranium One transaction? I don't know about this. Maybe Barbara or Susan does.
I don't know. And I don't know whether it's tied to Uranium One or not. I think that, that's an interesting point about Joseph DeGeneva being appointed to the, special counsel role in this Florida indictment, because he and his wife, Victoria Tenzing, were very, very much involved in the entire scandal around Uranium One. So I don't know the answer to that. I could only guess.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. Okay, I'm going to jump back here to our newsletter questions, and I'm going to take a question that we got a lot of this stuff, people really questioning the Trump administration, but I'm going to take this one here. So Richard says, okay, people using the word fact. What is your opinion on the fact that Trump was removed by the Pentagon from the briefing room during the pilot rescue operation and he was becoming unhinged? Also, it is obvious by now that he has some sort of mental decline despite doing some good things. So we get a lot of email questions really challenging Trump, coming at it from this media narrative that Trump has a mental decline, etc. Barbara or Susan, how do you answer questions like this when people send them in?
Well, you said it, Adam. People are living in a media narrative. Look, when I'm preparing to do one of my updates, I have to sit there and, kind of take it all in. I look at what people are saying on X. I look at, different YouTube opinions. I look at other people on social media. And, I feel like, my mind has been put through the spin cycle. Watching this stuff, it's crap. There is just so much crap out there. I mean, there is no fact involved in what you said about this. It is a PSYOP operation, feeding into the enemy's narrative. So instead, just watch him in the press gaggles. Just watch him in the cabinet meetings. Just watch him in action and do it from the standpoint of what we're saying about his strategic intention to completely uproot the institutions and the policies of the entire post-war order. And if you look at what he says, if you look at what the members of his cabinet say, if you go to primary sources and just pay attention to them, you can get your mind out of the spin cycle and start to use it again.
Barbara, any comments on this before we move on?
Yeah, it's all Democratic propaganda designed to actually, they've got this crazy thing about invoking the 25th Amendment, and the only way they're not going to do it with this cabinet. All right. So what they're trying to do is just spin things out to people who are already saturated with all of the, just take it back. Look at Russiagate, right? Think about that propaganda line. All right. Just think that through. What do they say? They said Trump is a Manchurian candidate, a tool of Putin. All right. He had prostitutes peeing on him in a bed under Russian surveillance. All right. That is just lurid. All right. And it was all fake, provably so. It was all proved that was totally fake, run by a British intelligence agent named Christopher Steele. They say he's retired from MI6. You don't retire from MI6. Okay. And that was an operation, a complete and total operation designed to get people completely flipped out. Soon, a little bit later in the broadcast, we'll take Charlottesville up, which was the next big thing that happened after he's a Manchurian candidate, having prostitutes pee on him in a bed in a Russian hotel. That lurid stuff. Now we find out that Charlottesville, all right, there were decent people on both sides, which he never said. The reason why Joe Biden ran for president, allegedly, was all fake. It was a fake operation run by the Southern Poverty Law Center. A false flag, complete fake narrative. All right. Unfortunately, a woman got killed in the process. And I think that's something else we're going to find out about. But I think that you got to think about the whole way this has been run in the media for over how many years now? Since 2015, 2016. All of it's fake, and provably so. And now we're going after the funding. That's what's going to go on in this whole business of indicting the Southern Poverty Law Center. I just saw an X today from a very reliable source that the Southern Poverty Law Center had a $500 million offshore account, anonymous, in the Cayman Islands. What do you think that means in terms of all the things that they've branded as racists and anti-Semites and hateful people? All right. It just is incredible, the operation which has been run. And it's to destroy the United States of America. That's the thing you got to get through your head. They've substituted Donald Trump for the United States of America. And they think that by attacking Trump, they're going to destroy the United States of America. And if they succeed, that will be true. If you actually think about what we went through with Biden, think about that. An absent, cognitively declined president with an auto pen signing everything, who said, basically, the NATO alliance is what I'm running. Not the United States, the NATO alliance. Total globalization. Think about COVID. Think about what they were trying to impose here. So I think you just got to get a handle on the fact that the media environment is totally contaminated, except for people who actually can give you the receipts or try to, as to what looks like the actual things going on in terms of the dynamics of the situation. We try to do that here. A lot of other people try to do it. And you just got to judge by what people's intentions are. Are you out there to get clicks? We're not particularly. Or are you out there to actually try and present the truth as best you can present it? And that's sort of what we're dedicated to.
Thank you very much, Barbara and Susan. And thank you, Richard, for sending in your question and being honest. We appreciate it. And I want to go through just some quick super chat thanks. Thank you, Pamela, for the super chat. Great to see you here. Danny Grand, thank you for your generous super chat. Make sure you're subscribed to our email newsletter. The link is in the description, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Thank you so much for your support. I'd also like to thank Joe Belcher. Thank you very much for your super chat. Again, please make sure you're subscribed to the channel, our email newsletter. Same for Lee Herring. Thank you very much for your super chat. We are completely reader and viewer funded. We don't have corporate sponsors. We make we stay alive because of people like you. Thank you very much for helping us. And okay, let's go to some more questions here that I have from our email newsletter. The next ones are going to be on the midterms here. So the first one I have is from Tony. Says, what needs to be done to coordinate efforts by the various PACs that support the current administration so that the messaging is consistent and concise enough for U.S. citizens to understand? Also, how to enhance the knowledge and ability of Republicans running in the midterms to clearly articulate what the administration has accomplished and contrasted it with the prior administration's lack thereof, to put it very mildly. Thank you very much, Tony, for your question. Barbara or Susan, your thoughts on the upcoming midterms. What is it going to take to actually seal the deal?
Well, that's a really good question, Tony. I appreciate it. This is the point in our discussion today where we make the point that we do have two different operations, Promethean Action, which hosts our YouTube broadcasts and is the platform for our policy discussions. And then we have our Promethean PAC, Political Action Committee, which is constituted under the Federal Election Commission to intervene into the midterm elections. Look, I think the only answer to this is that we have to become more and more hegemonic in terms of the spread of our method and our agenda and our discussions. First, you have to be cognizant. There's tons of PACs, tons of other organizations out there. And honestly, some of them are going to have their own agenda, which may only occasionally intersect with ours. But there's plenty of organizations, candidates, and other PACs who genuinely are trying to support the President of the United States. And what we're finding is that the more that people will orient toward us, recognizing that we're bringing something very unique to the table in terms of what has to be understood in these midterm elections, that it's not about an aggregation of individual hot button issues. And that is often the problem with a lot of the PACs and these other organizations. They go to the lowest common denominator. What's the hot button issue that I can get somebody riled up about? And they presume that that's going to motivate people to go to the polls. The big problem that you face in the midterm elections is going to be voter turnout. The force which inspires people, doesn't just anger them, doesn't just scare them, although there's a certain legitimacy to being scared about the consequences of these midterms. But what I think is going to shape the outcome of these midterm elections is to the degree to which enough of our citizens are inspired to understand just how big what this administration is endeavoring to do, literally finishing the American Revolution. And that means really being able to drill down with people on the questions of the difference between the American system of economy and the British system of economy, so that we can present, and because I'll put it this way, and this is what I said at the top of this discussion. If the midterms are conducted, or if people go to vote, whether it's on November 4th, or frankly, the majority of people are going to vote before November 4th. That's just the world we happen to live in at this point. But if people cast their ballot from the standpoint of how they are responding to a sensory bombardment, i.e., what's the price of gas today? What's the price of hamburger today? If people cast their ballots from that standpoint, probably we're not going to do so well. But if people go in there and cast their ballots from the standpoint, as I think many people did in 2024, I also think many people did this in 2020, not so much in 2022, but in 2020, the people who cast their ballots from the standpoint of being on the stage of history. That is, we're at a turning point. Our nation, people recognized our nation was being destroyed, even if they didn't understand who was doing it. But this is wrong. What's happening in our country is wrong. The loss of jobs, the destruction of our culture, the insanity of saying there's 55 sexes or whatever the latest number may be, and so on. People just knew that it was wrong. But it wasn't an aggregation of these individual issues. And they wanted somebody to stop it and reverse it. And they recognized that Donald Trump was that person. So they voted for him. I mean, I think the victories in 24 and what was in essence a victory in 2020, although it was taken from us, was people thinking from the standpoint, not as a voter, trying to get some goodies as a result of how an election is going to turn out, but literally as a soldier in a war. That this is big. This doesn't happen by the snap of a finger. There's going to be sacrifices. And hey, a lot of people learn that, after what happened to the J6ers. And a lot of those J6ers were, not all of them, but a lot of them were able to keep their spirit because they recognized that fundamental question, that this is a war. So I think that's the challenge that we have in the midterms. Now, I think many people on this call know, but I'm sure there's some new folks. So Adam, if you could pull up the Promethean PAC website and show people where to sign up for the midterm boot camps. Every 2 weeks, Promethean PAC conducts what we call our midterm boot camps. And you see up there in the upper right-hand corner where you can sign up, where you can get boot camp resources. These are live Zoom discussions. For the moment, they're on Zoom. The next one is May 1st, a week from this Friday. Then 2 weeks hence is the next one. Yes, Adam, I did remember to update it this time. And we have activists from all over the country who are on these calls, and our discussions are precisely how do you communicate this? Now you can see that we have organizing material for people. We have 2 half-page flyers, which you can order. We have a slideshow, and I promise in the next few days I'm going to get up the most recent slideshow we used, where people have resources that they can use to, again, communicate this very challenging question. We're in a revolution, so stop and think about it. A revolution means something new for most people. So how do you communicate something new? You can't use the old words. You can't use the old framework. Communicating something new is something that human beings uniquely do. And that is the challenge in this, communicating what it is that President Trump is doing on this grand scale in a way that is going to move some average voter, who probably less than half of the time bothers to vote in a midterm election, to move them to recognize what is actually at stake. Now, I will say, given Adam's report on what happened in Virginia and the fact that there was a massive shift toward the conservative side, even though they weren't able to overwhelm probably what happened in Fairfax and Northern Virginia at the last minute, I think it shows that, a layer of the population is very much mobilized from this standpoint of what is at stake and operating from the standpoint of being an actor and not a consumer or a recipient of whatever the powerful elite want to hand down to us. So I think that, it was a really good question. And I think that larger perspective is what people have to have in mind. And again, I encourage people to join us on these bi-weekly boot camps.
Thank you, Susan. So yeah, you can just search for PrometheanPack.com instead of Promethean Action. And we have good SEO, so we should be the first thing to pop up. And to sign up for the midterm boot camp, it's right up here in the menu on desktop. If you're on mobile, you just have to click the menu button and the midterm boot camp sign up will show up. So we invite everyone who's watching, if you want to take the next step in getting active and actively determining the outcome of what happens in the United States, I urge you to join our midterm boot camp. We have tons of people with years of experience in doing this, not just us, people from all walks of life, older Americans, millennials, people with tons of experience in things like local school boards or local election, your election operations. There's so many different ways you can participate in this process. And we have all these different kinds of people in a midterm boot camp. So it's really the best way to gain confidence that you're going to need in order to do this. We can help build that confidence for you to take action.
And Adam,
click
on the half-page flyer. Let's feature that there for a moment.
Yes.
Yeah. I really encourage people to order copies of this half-page flyer. This is our latest attempt to communicate President Trump's economic revolution. And there's the order page. You can get 100 flyers for a little as $30, as many as you need. And what we're finding, and this is often discussed on our boot camps, is how our supporters around the country are taking these to candidate events, Republican Party meetings, and elsewhere, and they're literally being grabbed out of people's hands. Because to go back to the question that launched this, I've seen what PACs put out. I've seen what most campaigns put out, and even the better ones don't take it from this standpoint. This is the unifying idea that we have to get across to people.
Thank you, Susan. We have some more questions here on the midterm elections, which I want to address. And I'm going to pull this in with a super chat who asked a good question. Whoops. All right. Okay. The software is a little bit funny sometimes. Okay. First one here is from Gina. As you know, historically, the party in power generally does not maintain control at the midterms. What might that mean for those supporting Trump should history repeat itself? Thank you, Gina. And John says, with the work done by your team, are you seeing more engagement in what this administration is doing and revealing that signals hope for the country post-President Trump's tenure? It seems there may be concerns for the midterms still. Thank you, John. And I want to pull up this super chat here from Josh. And I think Josh is also correct on this, but it kind of fits into the vibe of these other two questions. Hey, team, I continue to see growing support for the president from the Black community and with gay men as well. He built a huge coalition in 24 months, and we should continue to engage these large groups heading into the midterms. I agree with you very much, Josh, on both of those groups. Barbara and Susan, your thoughts on this next round of midterm questions here?
Well, I'm going to start out by scaring people. You know, if we don't win the midterms decisively, everything we're talking about here is going to have very severe problems, because they'll be able to do what they did in the first Trump administration. That is, you know, essentially sabotage everything. You have to face the fact that the Democratic Party right now is akin to a terrorist operation, actually trying to bring down the government of the United States. People worry about Joseph McCarthy and communism. This is far, far worse. It's far, far worse than anything we've experienced before other than the Civil War. And a lot of people think we're kind of in a cold civil war at this point. So we have to get organized, folks. We have to get organized like a, you know, Gideon's army, and we have to heal whatever wounds there are from the coalition based on the huge basic operation, which was right after Trump came into office with his mandate. They started the shooting war with the narratives to try and break this coalition totally apart. A lot of people who were, you know, basically part of the organization which won the 2024 election have either gone crazy, like Tucker Carlson, or like Charlie Kirk, they got assassinated. You got to think about the level of operations which have been going on from that side of the so-called aisle. So I don't worry so much about what is going to happen in 2028. What I worry about is what's happening right now in terms of the midterm. All of the crap about J.D. Vance, which I see in the chat, I see it all over the place. You know, think about, I put out some stuff on this and I got a lot of comments back which reflected this narrative. You know, Donald Trump doesn't trust him. Well, what does that mean? Donald Trump doesn't trust Tulsi Gabbard. Where is that coming from? Donald Trump doesn't trust RFK Jr. Those were key parts of the coalition which actually won the election, because those people are who they are. You know, and it's coming from the rhinos in the Republican Party who want to, you know, basically defeat Trump at all costs. It's part of a huge, I mean, I haven't had the time to investigate it, but were I to investigate it, I would find probably a Washington public relations shop running all of these narratives on the internet on behalf of some front group for Republican Party rhinos or the old Republican establishment. The coalition which Trump built in 2024 was meant to unite this country. All right. And you look at all of the things which have happened since. The counter operation is basically aimed at destroying large parts of the constituency organizations, which built the 2024 midterm election. All right. We've got to have not just a squeaker of an election. We've got to have, which is a big challenge, a mandate. We've got to come in and overwhelm them. And, I'm not interested really in commenting. I'm interested in people really getting active. You got to take it into yourself that I have to do something about this, not just for myself, but for future generations. What was it that scared the hell out of them? It was the combination of J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio as potential successors to Trump. Maybe even Donald Trump Jr. All right, but Donald Trump Jr. is who's responsible for J.D. Vance being there. All right, so think about that. These are guys who had various positions in their past life. Marco Rubio was a dyed-in-the-wool neoconservative. I won't even deal with his nonsense when he was on the Senate Intelligence Committee and other things. He's undergone a transformation. Why? Because he learned about the American system of economics. Same thing with J.D. Vance. He was a Democrat. He basically learned, along with his close friend, Marco Rubio, about the American system of economics. Yet, true to form, what do we see out there on the internet? Rubio for president. JD's no good, or JD for president, Rubio's no good. Or, it's the same old dirty trick, and people ought to be wise to it by now, all right? The aim was, don't let him build something beyond the victory in 2024, because then all of these insurrectionists would be finished. They'd be going to jail, all right? Instead, you see, and people say, well, why aren't people in handcuffs yet? Hello. Do you know what kind of rot existed in Washington, D.C. and all of these agencies when Trump came in? You're dealing with a generation of a dark age in the United States in which we almost lost the country. Damn close to it under Biden. We're now in the process of reversing all of that. And people are working 24 hours a day to do that. And we've got to come in, and basically cut all the doubting and second guessing and armchair analysis out of the picture and say, okay, what's the program, which we've put out here? It's very clear. If you don't believe us, go read Trump's executive orders, all of them. Think about what kind of future that creates were it to be legislation by the Congress. That should be the aim of the 2024 midterm. Take these EOs and turn them into legislation. Why hasn't that happened? Why did Trump have to do it by EO? Well, because the Congress was rotten. It had like a 2 or 3 vote majority on both sides of the thing. We've got to cure that. It's our job as citizens to actually do that. So that's kind of, the way I think about this question. I think we've got great hope, provided the fact that the American people actually act like they did in 2024, like they did, in Virginia. But we didn't do one thing in Virginia, which is really important. It's true that the base turned out, despite being outspent 3-1 by the Democrats, despite having Obama and all these other idiots, blasting away on the TV 24 hours a day. But you needed to have the same type of thing that you had in 2024 to win this thing and to overcome, the mail-in ballots from Fairfax County at the last minute. We've had it year after year after year. You've got to take that into account when you're making your calculations as to how you're going to turn out the vote. And the fact that the RNC failed to come through with the amount of money they needed to basically have an overwhelming victory is indicative that we still have problems there. And now there's a big piece in Politico over the last week, which actually talks about the fact that Susie Wiles is working her literal rear end off, setting up for the midterms, setting strategy for the midterms, trying to cover those problems with the RNC, trying to cover and bring together the PACs, etc. But it requires all of us to really get out there and fight like we're an army determined to save the country, because that's exactly what's at stake.
Yeah, and I want to add one more kind of put the dot under the exclamation point. In the chat, Tint D made a very important, it was way back up, Adam, very important point. She said, in the last election, she got 5 non-voters to vote. And she said, it's hard to change people who are regular voters and are already locked in. But I think that's an extremely important point. I mean, it's shocking when you find out what the numbers are in terms of certain layers in the population who don't vote. The majority of hunters don't vote. Well, you think they're going to vote Democratic? Of course not. So, they have to be convinced. The majority of evangelicals, the huge majority of evangelicals don't vote. The numbers are shocking, absolutely shocking. So I think that's a very good point. If you have people who are in our universe, find out whether or not they are actually voters or not. And if every MAGA warrior found 5 non-voters to vote, you just won the midterms.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Josh, for your question and comment. And thank you to our newsletter subscribers for sending in their questions. I'm going to jump back to the super chats just for a few seconds, and then we're going to go back to the newsletter questions. So the first one here is from somebody living in Japan. Susan and Barbara are the political moms I never knew I needed. Thank you. Enjoy a cup of coffee. Compliments from Japanese yen. Thank you for joining us, overseas friend. Please make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Okay, so here we have a question from Wellesley. You folks are a great resource. What is the relationship between the Bank of London and the Vatican Bank? Anyone know this history at all?
That's an old scandal. It involved, all sorts of things around the Bank of Ambrosia. There was a big scandal within the Vatican itself. And I frankly just don't remember all the details of it. I will try and look that up in terms of my archives and see what we had to say about it way back when. The Vatican obviously is a major spiritual force in the world, for good or ill. And it has been good, really good. I note in the midst of the controversy about the Pope that it was posted on Truth Social, great praise of Pope John Paul II. It's also had popes which have essentially embraced all of the British propaganda in terms of climate change and indigenous peoples and, Malthusianism and population control and open borders. I don't want to mention any names, but I think people can call them to light in their own minds. And it goes back and forth throughout history. It's something which the city of London. It's not just the city of London is not just a banking apparatus. It's an entire intelligence apparatus which switches back and forth in the current period between Paris and London in terms of financial centers and in terms of enforcement mechanisms for the financial centers in the world, and trying to control the Vatican and the world's Catholic population and its impact on other spiritual and religious groupings in the world is an enormous part of the power struggle. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Barbara. And thank you, Wellesley, for sending in that question. I'm going to jump a little bit ahead here because I want to take this next series of questions on this issue of Thune and the Save America Act, which seems like it just somewhat predictably got put on the back burner. So Dastrophe says, hello, Brainiacs. Those who say facts should bring receipts. That was much earlier in the show. Don't get your news from Reddit. Yes, psyops everywhere. We're great. All right, but here's the key one. How do we get rid of Thune? Love y'all. And I'm going to pull up these two other questions here, three other questions. What are your thoughts on the Senate passing SAVE Act? I am so frustrated that John Thune is sitting on his hands. I pray for our country every day. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you, Wendy. Do you think President Trump will ask J.D. Vance to take his place as the president of the Senate to get them off dead center? Thank you, Jeff. And Betty, what happened to the Save America Act? Why has Thune not been replaced?
Well, you got to basically, I think I condemned the entire Senate previously in this broadcast. For the most part, there aren't a lot of people in the Senate who are 100% on board with the president's agenda, pure and simple. The Senate under the Constitution, likes to think of itself as the deliberative body. The House is out there supposedly representing the people. The Senate is supposed to function somewhat as a check on that. And unfortunately, these guys take that constitutional mandate the wrong way in many respects. You'll never find a more arrogant or ego-driven group of people than in the United States Senate for the most part. It didn't used to be that way all the time. It has become that way. John Thune is a protege of Mitch McConnell, the turtle. And he is what he is. The problem, however, with the SAVE Act is not necessarily all on Thune, although he's the public face of it. The issue is, will you destroy the filibuster and therefore allow, first of all, there aren't enough total Republican votes right now for the SAVE Act, because you've got Murkowski and what's her face from Maine, who are against the SAVE Act. You're going to have to bring some Democrats over, even if you get the filibuster destroyed. And you've got to get the filibuster destroyed to be able to pass it, because otherwise you need 60 votes. Now, that's a big issue in the Senate, because the senators view their power as being able to conduct a filibuster. Trump has come back and said, well, why don't you at least force them to not be able to do that by just sitting in their offices and sending a note out, an email out saying I'm going to filibuster, but requiring them to get on the floor and actually debate by a standing filibuster. And they haven't even gone for that. So our problem is much bigger than, just John Thune, because he represents a Republican constituency in the Senate, which for the most part still isn't on board with Donald Trump, because quite frankly, they think they're smarter than Donald Trump, many of them. So that's the political problem. How do we deal with it? I think the only way we're going to ultimately deal with this, although I'm sure the president is coming up with all sorts of tactics, and he's talking to these people personally, and, he's putting all the heat he can put on them. But it really does rest with you guys out there. It really does rest with what kind of demands are we going to make on senators who are up for elections in the midterms? And how do we actually create across the board for all of the senators coming up in the midterms, one voice saying, here's what you've got to tell me you are on board with, or you will not get my vote. I tend to think that the one voice is Promethean Actions or Promethean PAC's, programmatic description of what Donald Trump has done. It's also just very simple. Are you on board, and will you legislate all of Donald Trump's executive orders if elected? That's really a key question. That's really a dividing line, between people who are in it for themselves and, conceal themselves from the voters and then act irresponsibly in Washington, D.C. But, that's the only way that I can see that we're going to reverse this and actually get people in there. You don't need to control it. You just need a lot more firebrands. Like, Josh Hawley, like, all of Senator Schmidt, like all of the people who are pretty new in the United States Senate, who are firmly on board with Trump's basic policy. That's sorely lacking if you just look at it, objectively overall. And many of these people, particularly those on the Intelligence Committee, are completely compromised by the intelligence community. So it's a real problem. And the only solution for it that I can see is the people actually not being consumers, but saying, okay, this is the anniversary of our revolution. Okay, we're going to basically make a new revolution, which is very, very, very simply based. Put Trump's executive orders into legislation, period. If you're willing to do that, you got my vote. And the only other thing which is possible is I won't vote for any Democrats, but the point is that's what we have to do to force the issue in the Senate. And it's much bigger than simply making calculations or moves around the Save America Act. And I might point out that in any state right now, you could get the substance of the Save America Act by actually getting voter ID and other aspects of that act written into your state elections procedures. That's one thing which people are sort of neglecting now by focusing on, the grand play here, but we have to do it. And so that's the other, alternative which we have to do. I'm also very enthused by what Harmeet Dillon is doing in the Justice Department, where she's herself determined to clean up the voter rolls before the election. And she's subpoenaing everybody. There's a big fight, for example, in Susan's state right now where, the Michigan Secretary of State is refusing to turn over the voter rolls. Well, there's going to be a lawsuit over that. And it's coming from Maine Justice, and it's going to be brutal because she's determined to actually get these voter rolls cleaned up before the election. So, but again, it all comes back to you guys. You got to actually think about it from the standpoint of political leadership and taking your citizenship back into your heart and into your mind.
Thank you, Barbara, for your answers, and thank you to everyone for sending in your questions. Thank you, Disastrophe. And I'd like to go and talk, and let's discuss California for a little bit. I have two questions here from supporters in California asking about Trump's endorsement. First off, thank you so much. I don't know you realize how much clarity and understanding you provided in helping me make sense of the political landscape over the last 10 years. A lot of it didn't make sense to me until I started tuning into Promethean Action, Barbara and Susan, and learning more through you. So thank you. With that said, I'm from California, and after trying to understand the situation with the British Empire and how the American economic system interacts with the global financial system, I wanted to ask your perspective on Steve Hilton. As you know, he's running for governor, and Barbara mentioned him a few weeks ago. Do you think he's somebody who can be trusted? Who is he really working for? To me, it seems he could be London's lapdog and a puppet for globalist interests, possibly trying to shape the Republican Party or create division. I'd really appreciate any insights you have on this. Thank you, Califo Red. And I have one here from Michelle. What are your thoughts about Trump's endorsement of Hilton for governor of California, especially considering his British background? Thank you very much.
I'll say a few things. I can tell you that our friends in California are still scratching their heads on that endorsement because most of the people that they're working with, who are grassroots MAGA people, are in favor of the other leading Republican candidate, Chad Bianco. I'm taking it up because I've faced this here in the state of Michigan, where sometimes you look at Trump's endorsements, and they're not what you think the MAGA grassroots wants, including yourself in many instances. And it's a challenge, because what I've come to conclude in terms of Trump's decisions, although I'm not always confident he's getting the best intel from people who really have their finger on the grassroots, but he may be getting his intel from people who are looking at the whole electorate in a state. Because for Trump, the question is, in some of these key places, like here in Michigan, with Senate seats and congressional seats, he's got to win. And he's factoring his decisions from the standpoint of who he thinks can win. Now, I'm not going to go any further than that in terms of California, except to say that because it's a jungle primary, in other words, for people in the rest of the country, this is one of these states where you don't have a Republican primary and a Democratic primary. You have one single, they call it jungle primary. Everybody's on the ballot, and the top 2 vote getters go on to the election. It's often been in the case, and I mean, it's very interesting in California right now. It's often been the case that in some of these jungle primaries, you have to choose between 2 Democrats in the general election. Well, I'm sure nobody on this call missed what happened to Eric Swalwell and his rapid fire ejection from both the governor's race in California, where he was the leading Democratic candidate, and his ejection from the Congress. That's left a very interesting situation where it's possible that the top 2 vote getters in this may end up being the 2 Republicans, Steve Hilton and Chad Bianco. That also tells you something about what is going on in the country. Now, that primary isn't until June, so there's still a fair amount of time, although I suspect absentee ballots will start going out fairly soon. Where the Democrats may still pull something off and push one of the Democratic candidates up to the fore. But, again, in terms of when the president makes especially a domestic political decision that I'm sitting there scratching my head about, I tell myself, this is proven to be fairly accurate in retrospect, he's looking at a broader landscape than I have access to. That being said, I'm not going to recommend one way or another how people should vote in California. They should vote their conscience. I don't know if Barbara wants to add anything.
Not really. I mean, there's justified concern about Hilton, given the fact that he was not just a Brit citizen. He was a political operative in Britain, who was actually the political counselor for the Cameron government and for taking the Conservative Party in a much more liberal direction, i.e. embracing environmentalism and other things. I don't know. I mean, becoming an American citizen was a very big deal, very big experience for him, as he has explained endlessly on TV. I hope that what he's saying is true. I don't know if it's true or not. But, people change. And that's the other thing you've got to actually always keep into account in your political calculations. And you've got to really pin these people down on what their actual political positions are on President Trump's agenda. And I think the calculation the president makes is, when I endorse people who are in really iffy political situations, they owe me. And they got to know that they owe me. And therefore, I have what Trump likes to call leverage, in a certain sense, in a political situation which is otherwise untenable for Trump. I mean, think about California. Is that really, at this point in time, potentially tenable for the Trump administration, given all the things that have gone on there over the past period? It's a mess. And can there be a great revolt? Our people out there think so, and I'm 100% behind them. But, a lot of what Trump goes into thinking about is, I gotta carry certain states for sure. These things in New York, New Jersey, California, are all basically, icing on the cake if we can pull them off. And he's looking at pulling them off. So that's how I'd answer your question, and that's about as far as I can go, because I can't know really without looking. I mean, I think it's useful for people to look at who's throwing money at the guy at this point, what their basic orientations are, because that's the other side that tugs on a candidate other than the president. And that's the other form of leverage, who are the donors. I haven't looked at that. And, I think you got to do that in terms of any real analysis.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and thank you very much, Susan. And thank you to our email newsletter subscribers for sending in these very important questions. All right, I have tons of super chat questions here. I'm sorry, guys. I don't think I'm going to be able to get to them all, but I do want to take this one here that I think aligns pretty well with what we've been discussing over the past month or so since this war began. So Mark says, why can't the U.S. establish its own independent energy pricing mechanics through an executive order to set all domestic oil prices based purely on supply and demand, instead of relying on global benchmarks like Brent crude?
Good question. Adam, could you share the screen? In terms of how we would do what Mark is talking about, I'm not sure. I suspect Scott Bessent has some ideas, but I think for people to understand the context of what he's talking about, this is a visual I did for our recent boot camp to give people a sense of what actually goes into the cost of a gallon of gasoline, and what is the significance of Mark's actual question. This operates off of a baseline of $3.23 a gallon. Whenever I fed this into an AI, they took that as the average. But what you see there is the breakdown of what actually goes in to the cost of that gallon of gas. 45% of it, $1.45, is actual production. And that's where Mark's question gets interesting, because now that we are an independent producer of oil and gas, that part of the equation becomes a lot more interesting. It's not so interesting back when we were dependent on other countries for getting gasoline. And then the refining and distributing is about 60 cents out of that gallon, 18%. Federal and state taxes is half a buck. If you're in California, I'm sure it's a lot more. That's another 16%. But then you get to the very interesting part, those two things down on the bottom, which add up to 21% of the cost of a gallon of gas. There's what Peter Navarro has called the terror premium. Because the Strait of Hormuz was always under threat of being closed because of the instability in the region, the markets could jack up this extra cost in terms of oil, and this calculates that at about 13% or 42 cents a gallon. And then here's the fun one, and this is what really gets to Mark's question. The Brent futures markup is a good 8% of the cost of a gallon, 26 cents, at least in this particular breakdown. What is the Brent futures market? This is what sets the price of gasoline. And it's a bunch of people in London who never take possession of a barrel of oil. This is not like a real futures market. Let's say you're a hog farmer and you're going to be selling your hogs in 6 months, and you want to lock in the price of the hog. So you purchase a futures contract, which locks in the price. Then 6 months from now, you deliver the hog and you get paid. The guys who set these Brent futures markets never deliver a barrel of oil. It is pure money manipulation. It is pure speculation. It is the lords of the commodities markets, not the commodities, setting the price for people. And that's what's dominated. Now there's another benchmark for the cost, which is West Texas, WTI. Now, that was not that significant if we were not an energy producing country. We now are. And the question that Mark is asking is, why can't we use the WTI, which is based on US production, to set the price of oil, not this speculative magician's Brent futures market? I think we should. And the fact that West Texas and the gap between West Texas and Brent is closing, maybe at the point West Texas goes over Brent, you've got even more leverage. We're not there yet. I don't think that's ever happened. I think these are things that Scott Bessent is probably thinking about all the time. Again, I don't know how a mechanism like that would work, but I just wanted to give people the kind of lay of the land in terms of where this question is coming from. And to put it in short form, don't blame Donald Trump for the high cost of gasoline right now. Blame the City of London. Barbara may have more she wants to add on that.
Yeah, I think we're headed in that direction. Trump signed an executive order, which, people haven't really thought about very much, under the Defense Production Act last week, to essentially mandate an increase in production of oil and gas in the United States from every oil company and gas company actually working in the United States at this point, and also refineries. And that is a very big deal because the majors, the so-called oil majors in the United States, have very much resisted upping production at this point. You take, he had that oil and gas roundtable in the White House, and they told him, we don't want to go into Venezuela to actually help them up their capacity. And Chevron was the only taker at that point. ExxonMobil said, no, we prefer the present market where we can not produce anything, but actually, give our shareholders a dividend every year. All right. Shareholder buyback, all that other kind of garbage, which we've had from Wall Street over the last period. So there was resistance in the actual production companies in the United States. So what he's doing right now is, pursuant to your question, he's increasing supply massively. We're seeking to, because we need it from the standpoint of AI. We need it from the standpoint of our actual situation vis-a-vis energy in the United States. And if we become even more energy dominant, we dominate the rest of the world in terms of production. And there's no argument which the London markets can make about setting prices for the world, because the United States is the central player. So I believe we're headed in that direction very clearly. And if we don't settle this war and prices don't come down as a result of that, then I think you'll see further action from the administration.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you, friend, for sending in your question. Please make sure you subscribe, get our free newsletter. Next question here is from David Gray, a longtime follower and viewer. Thank you, David, for joining us every week from across the pond there. Europe is fracturing. Hungary, Poland, Bulgaria, anti-EU, plus a new migration vote. Britain's government is falling apart. Is it possible for Trump? Is it possible that Trump is crushing the globalists? Can he keep the pressure up on the globalists?
Well, I don't think there's any question if you actually see what kind of shape Europe is in right now. I mean, he keeps saying, you're ridiculous. You could be using Russian gas almost. I mean, as kind of the signal that he's sending. The Russians have jumped on board and are in a major campaign saying, you're idiots, bring our gas back on. Most also importantly, nuclear power, which they left years ago under their crazy environmentalist code. So, yeah, I mean, it's falling apart partially by its own hand. It's committing suicide before our very eyes. That's why the United States has, it's painted as the United States is against Europe. no, we're really for Western civilization and the great role that Europe actually played in Western civilization. We think Western civilization is really quite remarkable as the most advanced civilization in the world. And we don't want to see it destroyed. That was the whole point of J.D. Vance's speech at Munich. And Marco Rubio made that same point when he came back to Munich last year and said the same thing, but in much nicer and less blunt language than JD had used. So, yeah, I mean, you know, they're essentially falling apart, and Trump is taking names. You know, there's stuff out there saying that he is considering what he's going to do about the countries who essentially called what we're doing in Iran a violation of international law and refused to honor their commitments under NATO. And I think there's going to be big steps taken in that direction after this war concludes. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I think that's a pretty clear answer to what's going on.
Thank you, Barbara. I'd like to give a couple more shout outs here. Thank you, Carol, for joining us. Can't show your super sticker, but thank you very much for joining us. Please make sure you're subscribed. One from David Sherwood. Thank you all very much. Say hello to Tony Sellers for me. Hopefully she's watching. Thank you very much for joining us. So glad you could be here. Paul just says, Susan, can you check your email updates? Grok has created a couple block diagrams that describe the American system. Any feedback would be appreciated. Thank you, Paul. We'll take a look for that. Thank you for sending in this question. Sorry we couldn't get to it. Thank you for joining us. Please make sure you're subscribed to our email newsletter and to our channel here on YouTube. Melody says, Adam, I could never get my email to work because I had problems with political addresses since Dr. Turley's channel was taken down from YouTube. Melody, I just wanted to assure you that Dr. Turley's channel has not been taken down. I was going to pull it up for you on YouTube, but I was watching him right before. So his channel is still on YouTube. Please check your email inbox. Just look at your spam folder. But I've been sending you emails for the past few days trying to get in touch with you. So please check on that for me. Karen, thank you so much for joining us. Please make sure you're subscribed. I had one from Lick. Sorry, I couldn't take this one in more detail. On the tariff refund portal, I think it's a setup. Trump did it to see who will take the bait. So far, big corporations are not doing it. Trump said, I hope they do not take it. They know me well. It's a trap. Well, I think he had to do the portal, but it's interesting that it's optional. So the court basically said if companies want, they can go and request a refund for the tariffs. So I simply don't know what the big corps are doing, but we hope they don't take it either. Thank you for joining us today. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel. David, I'm sorry I couldn't take your question here. Why do we seem to lose in district courts but have success in appellate courts? Or is my premise wrong? Barbara, any quick thoughts on that one?
The district courts have got the latest round of law school graduates, and the appellate courts are a little more seasoned.
Thank you very much, David. Please make sure you're subscribed. And the last shout out for today, Cindy Gibson. Sorry again, I didn't take your question more in full. The fertilizer question and food shortage. How is Iran involved in this? Not exactly certain. Thank you for joining us, Cindy. Please make sure you're subscribed. Our next YouTube update is going to be on Saturday. Ladies, any last words for today's show?
Organize, organize, organize. Get on the boot camp. Get active. That's the best antidote against all of the nonsense you're actually confronted with every single day, is when you go out and actually talk to real people and change them. And it's a very exciting process.
What she said.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Again, please make sure you're subscribed. Link to get our free email newsletter is in the description, and we will see everyone next Thursday.